As a child, did you ever play the game Blind Man's Bluff? It's usually where one is led blindfolded through an obstacle course of various household articles placed strategically across the path. Only the bravest would consider trusting a sibling to stand on the other side of the room and let them call out with phrases like, "Take 2 baby steps to the left," and "Take 4 giant steps straight ahead." I must admit, of all the childhood games that I can recall playing, I liked that game the least. Why? Because it's scary where you can't see. As grown-ups, we don't like the dark either, but we walk in it. We often complain about how scary it is to walk in the dark where we can't see where we're going. Of course, we've every reason to be cautious. We are blind. We can't see the future. We have absolutely no vision beyond the present. We are blind and blind to our future. It's one limitation that we all share. The wealthy are just as blind as the poor. The educated are just as sightless as the unschooled. None of us know how our children will turn out. None of us know the day we will die. None of us knows whom he or she will marry, or even if marriage lies before him or her. We are universally, absolutely, unalterably blind. And try as we might walk as straight as we can, chances are we're going to get hurt. And so I've entitled this message, Navigating the Unknown, Lessons We Can Learn from Jairus. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, verses 21 and selected verses to 43, we read, "When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him. 'My little daughter is dying,' he said. 'Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live.' So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. 'Your daughter is dead,' they said. 'Why bother the teacher anymore?' Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, 'Don't be afraid, just believe.' He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, 'Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep.' But they laughed at him. After he had put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, 'Talitha cum,' which means, 'Little girl, I say to you, get up.' Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. I want to acknowledge Max Lucado and his style of telling this story, and so I borrow from it liberally to share this message. We pick up the story of Jairus. He is a man who has tried to walk as straight as he can. But Jairus was a man whose path had taken a sudden turn into a dark cave, and he doesn't want to enter that cave alone. Jairus is the leader of the synagogue. That may not mean much to you and me, but in the days of Jesus, the leader of the synagogue was the most important man in the community. The synagogue was the center of religion, education, leadership, and social activity. The leader of the synagogue was the senior religious leader, the highest-ranking professor, the mayor, and the best-known citizen, all rolled up into one. Jairus has it all: job security, a guaranteed welcome at the church's coffee shop, a pension plan in spite of the recession, golf every Saturday, and an annual holiday on the Platinum Mile in Cape Town's V&A waterfront. Who could ask for more? Yet Jairus does. He has to ask for more. In fact, he would trade the whole shebang, perks and privileges, for just one assurance that his daughter would live. The Jairus we see in this story is not the clear-sighted, nicely groomed civic leader in his Armani suit and 200 Rand haircut. No, instead, he is a blind man begging for a gift. He fell at Jesus' feet, saying again and again, "My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." He doesn't barter with Jesus. You know, the kind of, you do me a favor and I'll take care of you for life. No, he doesn't negotiate with Jesus. The kind of things we're used to. The guys in Jerusalem are getting pretty testy about your antics. I tell you what, you handle this problem of mine and I'll make a few calls. Neither does he make any excuses. Normally, I'm not this desperate, Jesus, but I've got a small problem. None of this. He just pleads. There are times in life when everything you have to offer is nothing compared to what you're asking to receive. Jairus is at such a point. What could a man offer in exchange for his child's life? Now, there are no games, no haggling, no masquerades. The situation is starkly simple. Jairus is blind to the future, and Jesus knows the future, so Jairus asks for his help. And Jesus, who loves the honest heart, goes to give it. And God, who knows what it is like to lose a child, empowers his son. But before Jesus and Jairus get very far, they are interrupted by emissaries from his house. "Your daughter is dead. There's no need to bother the teacher anymore." Oh my goodness, the lack of care and compassion. But it doesn't stop here. You see, here is where the story really gets interesting. Jesus goes from being led to leading, from being convinced by Jairus to convincing Jairus, from being admired to being laughed at, from helping out the people to casting out the people. Here is where Jesus takes control. We pick up the story, but Jesus paid no attention to what they said. I love that line. Don't you? It describes a most critical principle for you and me as we live as Christians in these days. Ignore what people say. Block them out. Turn them off. Close your ears. And if you have to, walk away. I've done that. Are you going to? Ignore the ones who say it's too late to start over. Disregard those who say you'll never amount to anything. Turn a deaf ear towards those who say that you aren't smart enough, fast enough, tall enough, big enough. Ignore them all. Jesus turns immediately and pleads with Jairus. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Jesus compels Jairus to see the unseen. When Jesus says, just believe, he's imploring with him, don't limit your possibilities to the visible. Don't listen only for the audible. Don't be controlled by the logical. Believe that there is more to life than meets the eye. Trust me, Jesus is pleading. Don't be afraid, just trust. My friends, let me explain it this way. A father in the Bahamas cries out the same plea to his young son who is trapped in a burning house. The two-story structure was engulfed in flames, and the family, the father, mother, and several children, were on their way out when the smallest boy became terrified and ran back upstairs. And his father outside shouted to him, "Jump, my son, jump, I'll catch you." The boy cried, "But Daddy, I can't see you." "I know," his father called, "but I can see you." The father could see, even though the son could not. As Paul wrote, we set our eyes not on what we see, but on what we cannot see. What we see will last only a short time, but what we cannot see will last forever. 2 Corinthians 4:18. So Jesus is asking Jairus to see the unseen, to make a choice, either to live by the facts or to see by faith. When tragedy strikes, we too are left to choose what we see. We can see either the hurt or the healer. That choice is ours. Jairus made his choice. He opted for faith in Jesus, and faith in Jesus led him to his daughter. At the house, Jesus and Jairus encounter a group of mourners. Jesus is troubled by their wailing. It bothers him that they express so much anxiety over death. "Why are you crying and making so much noise? The child is not dead, only asleep." Now that's not a rhetorical question. It's an honest one. From his perspective, the girl is not dead. She is only asleep. From God's viewpoint, death is not permanent. It is a necessary step for passing from this world to the next. It's not an end, it's a beginning. As a young boy, I had two great loves: cycling and eating. Holidays and school afternoons were made for cycling and eating. Mom had one rule, though: wash your hands and clean up before sitting at the table. Her first words to us as we came home was always, "Go wash your hands and clean up before you come and eat." No boy is really fond of washing and cleaning up, but I never once complained and defied my mom by saying, "It's only clean dirt." I figured out clean hands was a small price to pay. And from God's perspective, death is a small price to pay for the privilege of sitting at his table. Paul wrote, "Flesh and blood cannot have part in the kingdom of God. This body that you and I have, that can be destroyed, must clothe itself with something new that can never be destroyed. And this body that dies must clothe itself with something that can never die." 1 Corinthians 5:50 and 53. But God is even more insistent than my mom was. In order to sit at his table, not just washing hands, a change of clothing must occur. And we must die in order for our body to be exchanged for a new one. So from God's viewpoint, death is not to be dreaded, rather it's to be welcomed. And when Jesus sees people crying and mourning over death, he wants to know, why are you crying? When we see death, we see disaster. When Jesus sees death, he sees deliverance. When we experience tragedy, we see terror and trauma. but Jesus sees victory. That's too much for the people to take in, and so they laughed at him. Now, look closely, because you aren't going to believe what Jesus does next. He throws the mourners out. Yes, that's what the text says, after throwing them out of the house, verse 40. He doesn't just ask them to leave, he throws them out. He picks them up by the collar and the belt, and he sets them sailing. Jesus' response was decisive and strong. In the original text, the word used here is the same word that is used to describe what Jesus did to the money changers in the temple. It's the same verb used 38 times to describe what Jesus did to the demons. Why? Why such force? Why such intolerance? Because Jesus is never going to leave us alone. Remember this, the last words recorded by Matthew, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will be with you to the end of the age. And God isn't going to let the noise of this world distract you from your journey with Him. He is still busy casting out the critics and silencing the voices that could deter you. Some of His work you have seen, most of it you haven't. Only when you get home will you know how many times He has protected you from luring voices. Only eternity will reveal the time He blocked your progression on the highway, distancing you from a shady opportunity. And only heaven will show you the times He protected you by giving you a mate who loves God more than you do. Opening the door for new business so that you could attend the same church. Having the right voice with the right message on the right radio station, or an email from a friend on the day that you needed his encouragement. Take note of this. God knows that you and I are blind. He knows living by faith and not by sight doesn't come naturally for you and me. I think that's the reason He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Not for her sake, not for her parents' sake. She was far better off in heaven. But for our sake, to teach us that heaven sees when we trust. And so, my friend, as you continue in your life's journey, place your faith and trust in Jesus and see where He will lead you. God bless you. Amen.